lot of people think the life on the lighthouse is routine. I hate this word.
Now that we sit comfortably within the conveniently protective arms of the technologically advanced 21st century, it's often far too easy to forget how catastrophically menacing the ocean can be. We now hold close to our collective chest a whole host of rescue and recovery fail-safes should the unthinkable happen. And although of course the ocean still remains a very dangerous place, we've all but managed to tame it compared to the dangers of a century or two ago. Dangers that not only those venturing across it were forced to deal with, but also a select few who would take a position inside a very literal guiding light to aid those making the journey. The keepers of the lighthouses. From the mysterious disappearance of the 3 Fragment lighthouse keepers, presumed to have been swept away by severe weather in December of 1900, through to the horrific freak accident of Henry Hall's demise, such a position carried immense risk. And not only from the elements, as the early 1900s tale of Victoriano Alvarez dictates, also from ourselves. I won't detail exactly what this evil fucker did to the dozen or so women in his captivity, but let's just say that he deserved it when Terza Randon finally managed to get in a good swing with a hammer that then connected with his head. Several times. And yet, in spite of the many multitudes of things that can very easily go wrong while maintaining them, lighthouses have often remained beautifully mysterious locations within the imagination of mankind. For precisely the same reasons that a certain Jack Torrance would fall prey to insidious overlook, the seemingly meditative effect of carrying out a series of simple yet critical tasks while surrounded by the comfortable boundaries of your own solitude can understandably appear to be a little spiritual. And of course, that in of itself seems odd when you're trapped on a tiny remote island with only your wits and a few companions around to tackle such issues as mechanical faults or loss of contact with supply ships that then in turn causes lacking food rations, or the replacement keepers sent via a relief ferry to get you off a cold, damp rock simply not turning up. There might have been a storm that stopped them, or a simple bump in the road when finding someone for the job. Who knows?
They were headed towards a gloomy, spooky house, unaware of the dangers that lurked ahead.
The thing is, in spite of all possible reasons that such a position might appear alluring to a prospective keeper, if you're unable to cope with the conditions imposed upon you, the borderline guaranteed cabin fever and consecutive restlessness and irritability that follows is certainly going to turn what was once a positive or hell even exhilarating experience to one that tastes like ash in your mouth. Maybe you do something stupid and make a mistake, or simply go a little crazy. Or, as is the case within our game of choice for this particular video, maybe you literally fall in love with the fucking thing. So, this is where we're going to start talking about it. Now, for any familiar viewer of the channel, it's worth stating straight away that this video's format is going to be somewhat different from my usual norm. And the first reason for this is that I actually like to experiment a little more with the general structure of the videos when covering a more specific oddity such as this, but it's also due to the fact that if I'm being completely honest, this game isn't really a game at all. Originally released in November of 2020 through indie Russian developer Nikita Kaf, who outright states via the game's itch.io page that the project was intended to be an artistic representation of word and form, and as a result, while barely lasting a mere 10 to 15 minutes at best, approaching Lighthouse Keeper with the expectation of receiving a typical video game experience is going to result in immense disappointment. And I don't just mean that it dips into the spectrum of visual novel stuff that I've covered in the past, as ironically this game still features even less interactivity than either Milk Inside a Bag of Milk or Speed Dating for Ghosts. In fact, to risk sounding a little pretentious, when taking into consideration the borderline non-existent player agency within this, game, the narrative and presentation of Lighthouse Keeper instead feels far more akin to an avant-garde art installation. The game's visuals are frankly exquisite, incredibly striking through stark contrasts of black and white, while the narration of the game's only character is delivered with the kind of stilted pronunciations and unhinged mannerisms that, even if these are simply due to the game having been translated from the developer's native Russian to English, all impose this incredible sense of unease when considering the speaker, and especially when paired with the minimal droning soundtrack that simmers threateningly in the background.
They would give everything for this opportunity. Today, in my place, changing the blown fuses in the middle of the open ocean.
As for the narrative itself, Lighthouse Keeper presents to you a single day within the delusional headspace that is the unnamed protagonist. A man who, at least according to the game's itch.io page, has been caring for the structure for knocking on 20 years now. And yet this seemingly extreme tenure is entirely self-imposed, with the Keeper refusing all potential company or assistance when speaking with those on the big land, as he refers to it, in the hopes that his isolation might actually last forever. Which is really just as well, because being here with this guy for even such a short a visit as 10 minutes is frankly fucking uncomfortable. I mean, would you honestly fall asleep next to someone like this and not expect to wake up at the bottom of the ocean?
It's like I don't even move, because I am the lighthouse.
Spoiler alert, the answer should be fucking no. And also spoiler alert in general, this game is so short that there isn't really much point in holding anything back. But if you're curious as to where this goes without my ramblings, it barely costs a thing on Steam, and I urge that you give it a go for the raw experience. But again, make no mistake, Lighthouse Keeper is not, for all intents and purposes, a title that you could class as an actual game, and if you're looking for something like that, I suggest you check out an entirely different Lighthouse Keeper game that I reviewed last year. However, if you're open to experiencing an extremely brief snippet of what is essentially the mad ramblings of a crazy dude, one who continuously attempts to justify his perspective through romanticizing the lighthouse itself with every action, or as we'll shortly come to discover, lack thereof, there's some surprisingly thought-provoking material here.
Therefore, I'm protected from destruction. I protect myself.
While constantly juggling ruminations on the responsibility of routine and the value of his position and his intense belief that the lighthouse is his and his alone to care for, at the very heart of the protagonist's narration lies a single dwelling thought of consequence. That is, to decide as to whether or not he can live with the fact that through pursuing ignorance, the Keeper is essentially murdering any ship or sailor that strays too close to the island itself. And what do I mean by that? Well, if such an event occurs, the lighthouse beam is switched off, removing all hope of navigation and leading to the destruction of the vessel if it should smash upon the rocks. And as already seen through the previously shown radio transmissions, these aren't incidents that the Keeper then reports to the mainland, stating instead that there is no news, no ships to report, no reason to panic. And why does he do this? Well, the protagonist's justification for it is simply that the lighthouse itself doesn't like strangers. The lighthouse wishes to deny potential trespassers their safe passage, and in turn the Keeper deludes himself into believing that he is merely following the structure's bidding, even stating that while he can't bring himself to destroy ships with his own two hands, he shares the lighthouse's disdain for strangers, and as such, while following the wishes of the lighthouse, he is serving a cause that is bigger than him, essentially deifying the pile of bricks and mortar that he so hopelessly worships, and hoping that any repair he performs on it is one met with approval, as if it was a living sentient entity. It's also realizations such as this that then calls into question how unreliable a narrator our Keeper might actually be, stating that he often fails to notice how he moves around the lighthouse while tending to his duties, and that it actually scares him at times when lapses in attention occur, a factor that no doubt contributes to his trance-like willingness to go along with the extinguishing of the light when strangers appear on the horizon, blindly going along with what he perceives as the will of the lighthouse, in what has now become a deadly form of routine. That is to say, he's done this shit enough times now, it's just second nature. And after 20 years and some change, it's unlikely that he even remembers the first time it occurred, Nor is it also likely to be a coincidence that while cozying up to the firelight, the distinct image of a wolf shines through the flames, an animal that often symbolically represents terror and destruction throughout Norse mythology, and also features as an icon of greed within the writings of Genesis. And these are three distinct elements to our protagonist's dilemma.
After all, the lighthouse shines for me only.
The Keeper's greedy desire to withhold the lighthouse from others has become an unforgivable source of destruction, betraying his position for perceived power and responsibility over the structure, which ironically then uproots the very power and responsibility over life that he has been charged with. His role within the world of maritime navigation is one often populated with decisions and choices that preserve life. And in choosing to neglect this, the Keeper now represents a figure of terror, another myth upon the endless seas that sailors will come to recognize, the mysterious island of the lighthouse lamp that never shines for those that stray far too close, for to do so would result in treachery, plunging the unfortunates into blind darkness and drowning them in the cold water should they smash against the rocks. Of course, I might be looking into this far too much. I'm aware that I can do that, but ultimately this is what I actually came to love about this brief, ridiculously short experience. It's also worth bearing in mind that the game does in fact have two endings, and neither of them are particularly happy. The first sees the Keeper satisfied that the lighthouse lamps shone only for him, and that he suspects that there have been a few casualties on the rocks that will hopefully result in supplies washing upon the shore. The alternative ending instead punishes the Keeper through the lighthouse malfunctioning and alerting the passing ships with alarm messages due to the Keeper having not fulfilled his duties of repairing the fuses and the stained glass windows, which are the only real choices actually offered to the player, and again calls back into question the protagonist's focus on routine. In spite of how much he claims to actually hate the word, instead preferring to think of his work as a disciplined effort, neglecting his ever-important routine ultimately proves to be his undoing, shattering the protective bubble of isolation that has been carefully cultivated around him over the last 20 years.
We gone, you fool, we're gone.
So I mentioned before a few select examples of strange, horrible occurrences of lighthouse-related history, and considering how damn neglectful a species we can be at times for the mundane activities of daily life, I think it's safe to say that something like this could have happened at some point in the past. Sure, maybe not 20 consecutive fucking years of it, that's a bit of a stretch, but when somebody has the power of life and death in their hands and also knows damn well that there really isn't a thing anyone could do to stop them if they chose to just switch off the only lifeline that some depend on, maybe, just maybe, they'd stop and think about it. L'appel du vide, or rather translated from French into English, the call of the void, is a recognised phenomenon that exists purely to represent such an inclination. When you stand upon a high point and feel compelled to jump, your instincts kick in and prevent you from doing so. Instinct, self-preservation and responsibility keep you in check, and as a result, most will ignore such an irrational urge. But not everybody does. And if the game makes you think about anything, maybe that's what this should be.